Greetings, everybody, and a happy Friday 13. CISOs around the world have responded to the pandemic by quickly instituting measures to maintain business continuity and protect against new cyber threats. To manage continuity, they've been patching remote systems over VPNs that have strained and under increased loads. They've been monitoring spiking threat levels, including a near seven-fold increase in spear phishing attacks since the pandemic began. Remote workers are also being bombarded with attacks based on COVID-19 crisis themes that are taking advantage of delayed updates to email and web filters and using social engineering to prey on workforce concerns. With all this happening, the focus of security leaders, CISOs, and CIOs is moving more towards tactical work and focusing more on keeping the lights on. With that, what has also perhaps been impacted is the board priorities, the priorities of the board of directors. If you look at the state of cybersecurity surveys by the big four firms in the past 5 years, or the state of internal audit or responsibilities of the board of directors, we'll see that cybersecurity was on top of that list and was there until the pandemic began. The title of today's session is cybersecurity still high up on the board of directors list? My name is Farooq Naiyer, and I'm the Chief Information Security Officer at Orion, and I'll be moderating today's session. I would like to start off by introducing today's esteemed panelists, and then we'll dive into the conversation. I'd like to first start off with Olivera Zatezalo. Would like to introduce yourself.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'm Olivera Zatezalo, and I'm Chief Security Officer at Huawei Canada. It's my responsibility to work with Canadian government in an open and transparent fashion to make sure all products and services Huawei sells in Canada are compliant with Canadians' laws and regulations. Prior to joining Huawei, I spent over 20 years in Canadian telecommunication industry, so lots of expertise. I'm very excited about this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Is Mike Melo.
Hey everybody, Mike Melo, Chief Information Security Officer with Life Labs. Hope everyone's having a good day. Looking really forward to this conversation with my colleagues here. And back to you, Farooq.
Thank you, Mike. John Pinard.
Hi, I'm John Pinard. I'm the Chief Information Officer for Resource Productivity and Recovery Authority. I have about 30 years experience in IT, including 17 years at pharmaceutical, as the head of IT at a pharmaceutical organization, and healthcare as well. Looking forward to this event.
Thank you, John. Next up is Scott Currie.
Hi, good morning. I'm Scott Currie. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer at the Hospital for Sick Children, also known as SickKids Hospital in Toronto. I've been working at SickKids now for about 4.5 years, really focused on managing and mitigating the ongoing threats associated with cybersecurity actors in healthcare. And it's something certainly increasing and getting an awful lot of focus in many organizations. So I'm excited to be part of this panel and talk about how cybersecurity can and should be a real focus for leadership.
Thank you, Scott. Next up is Carlos Chalico.
Hello, how are you? My name is Carlos Chalico. I am a cybersecurity and privacy professional working for Ernst & Young, and I am also a volunteer with the ISACA Toronto chapter, where I have the role of the secretary. I'm very excited for being here today. Thank you very much for the invitation.
Thank you, Carlos. I love your background. Got some really good pictures in the back. We'll probably talk about it later on. Okay, let's dive right into the conversation. And would like to open the floor by addressing the elephant in the room. And the elephant in the room is cybersecurity still high on the list of board of directors? So I'd like to start off with John Pinard in terms of what's your take on this?
Yeah, so I guess the question of, is it still high on the list? I would say it's higher than it ever has been. With the pandemic, there are more and more actors getting involved in cyber attacks, and it is, I mean, even with the so many remote workforces, it's become a much bigger issue than it ever was. And so I would say that it's an even bigger issue with the board of directors than it ever has been. I know that with our organization, cybersecurity was always just one of those, how are things with security going? Now it's a specific question at every board meeting about what we're doing to ensure that that we are protecting ourselves from added risks of cybersecurity.
Yeah, good point. Couldn't agree more on this. I mean, as a CISO, I think we all feel that this should be even of more importance to the board and the executive management. Well said. Like to turn to Carlos. I mean, Carlos, you work more on the external side of things or in more of an advisory capacity. How do you see this being a priority for the boards? Has anything changed, or is it still the same? What's your take on that?
No, I thank you. I think it is evolving, and just to echo what John is saying, as you just mentioned it as well. I'm not a CISO, but I work with many CISOs, and I have had the opportunity of working with CISOs not only in Canada but in other countries as well. And I think the interest has increased on when it comes to cybersecurity or information security. We see more boards involved in trying to understand what they have to be doing in order to effectively respond to the cybersecurity challenge. I think that the evolution is taking us now not to have the board interested, but have the board working on how to properly understand how to tackle the challenge. In addition to my own personal experience, I have had the chance of being involved in different research initiatives executed by Ernst & Young. And what we have seen is that boards are more focused on doing something on cyber, but there seems to be challenges on the communication and on properly understanding, which particular actions to operationalize in order to properly respond to these. So that's what we are seeing. So I think that the next challenge we have is on have clarity as cybersecurity professionals when talking to the board on how the cybersecurity challenges have to be faced. I think that's what we are seeing right now.
Okay, let's take this conversation further. So, and whenever we talk about board of directors as it comes to security, we are touching on some really critical parts of security governance or critical components of security governance. So the question that I want to put forward is that how do you think that security governance has evolved ever since the pandemic? Has it evolved? Has it changed? And has it changed for the better? So I'd like to start off with Olivera. What's your take on this? I mean, in terms of how the evolution of security governance during the current pandemic?
Yeah, so the way we work definitely changed since March. And at the beginning of this pandemic, we have to revisit the way we work, working hours. We moved people who can do the work from home. So at that time, we did have to revisit some of the policies. We had to make some changes. So I think that's one area of an impact to the governments was to revisit all security policies and see what changes do we need to make right now that like some of our people are working from home, maybe not all, but some of our people are working from home. So definitely some network segregation because you have people logging from different areas, some firewall changes, and this all had to be documented and made in the governments, in the security policies and procedures. Another very important area, I think, is to say also how the SOC operates. So normal hours have changed, like we regrouped people. Some people are working longer hours to make sure they keep a distance from the rest of the team and stuff like that. So we all know that in the SOC, we do have this set of algorithms to monitor people at the critical positions. What are the normal hours? Are they working from outside of the normal hours and stuff like that? So all these changes have to be propagated from the governments to managers to even operations, the Security Operations Center. And another very important area that I would like to highlight, although it did not impact me because I work in telecommunication. In telecommunication, we were set up to telework for a number of years right now. But when you look at the manufacturing, like physical distancing is presenting a challenge. So as you know, physical security is part of the cybersecurity. So I think these guys, and it's not that I think I know because I talked to a number of people in the manufacturing, they had to make some changes in their physical security policies to make sure people understand that they have to keep a distance when they are doing some work on the floor or whatever. Also, to make change in the policies when it comes to opening and closing the door. Some doors are only working one way and stuff like that. So all that had to be updated from the governance again to management to security operations to enable the proper flow of the traffic, like a human flow of the traffic in the manufacturing. So I think definitely a lot of impact depending on the industry or the way you do your work.
Thank you, Olivera. Turn it to Mike Melo in terms of how you think or how do you see your organization's security governance evolve during the pandemic?
Yeah, I think that, well, obviously security governance, playing a functional role into our enterprise governance. I think since the onset of COVID-19, corporate boards they've faced a string of difficult decisions, right? It's really revolutionized, how organizations have to operate. We've seen something similar in the past, where we have a global security contextual change with, the 9/11 attacks. And it really changed the context of terrorism and targeted violence. And similarly, COVID-19, it really causes us to reconsider what composes a security threat, right? So in our ever evolving security environment, it's essential that we're always looking beyond current realities, right? There's always the challenge now, but what's the challenge coming? And we have to be able to timely evaluate our strategic implications and effects on our people, our customers, international systems, especially regarding global pandemics, right? So I think, the challenges to security governance will be to remain effective and efficient, and the ability to establish and implement coherent priority actions, and quickly react to these complex scenarios, right? So what we've been doing is really, there's two focuses, right? Flexibility and agility. We have to work with our organization. We have to work with our board of directors and supporting them and, providing them appropriate information as security threats are related to the organization and our operational impacts. So I think, that's where we're really seeing an evolution to security, is having to be very agile, having to have some flexibility, right, in some of our standards. And we've seen a lot of great support, especially in the healthcare industry, from our government regulation requirements, a lot of support from the government there in being able to have flexibility in data sovereignty and residency when it comes to, COVID-related testing. So, I think that this is a global issue and everyone's stepping up, but as it specifically relates to security governance, we just have to be agile and flexible in what we're doing and looking at our challenges now, but also in the future.
Thank you, Mike. I'd like to turn it to Scott. Scott, in terms of your experience on this, how do you see cybersecurity or cybersecurity governance evolving during the pandemic?
Yeah, thanks, Farooq. I think, as others have said, our boards are looking at cybersecurity as being as big, if not bigger, a priority as it ever has been. I think one of the things that I've seen evolving through the pandemic is instead of just sort of asking questions about the state of information security within the organization, we're starting to see our board members begin to ask about education for them on cybersecurity, in bringing more sort of knowledge and awareness of what security is, what it means, and what some of the threats are. And in fact, our board has gone so far as to ask us to start thinking about running a tabletop exercise for them at the board level to understand, how these threats really evolve and how we as an organization are prepared to react to them. So I think it's moved from the traditional idea of, we provide updates and KPIs and statistics and progress and, all those traditional types of reporting into something quite different now, which is, of course, still providing that level of detail and that level of data, but really having the board start thinking about how they can take a more active role in security and have a much better understanding of what the implications of security are within healthcare. Healthcare and healthcare providers are under constant threat, and those threats are evolving, it seems like, on a daily basis. And so these are real concerns within the hospital and healthcare industry that our board and our executive take extremely seriously. And I think the level of engagement from a governance perspective and the level of engagement from an executive perspective is only just getting deeper and more important. So I think that's probably the biggest change I've seen through this pandemic. And I think it's partly driven by the pandemic and the evolving security requirements of organizations. But I think beyond that, it's looking at the global state of information security with respect to healthcare is really driving our board to start thinking a little bit differently about how they govern with respect to information security.
Thank you, Scott. Okay, we'd like to take this conversation a bit further. Now, I was reading in one of the reports by Gartner that 70% of CISOs and security buyers believe that budgets will shrink by the end of 2020, but plan to ask for significant increases by the end of 2021, by the beginning of calendar 2021. I'd like to turn this to John first in terms of what's your take on this? Do you agree with this? Or what's your stance on this, and how do you see this thing changing?
Well, I think I'll start out by saying it's a lot of this. I think is the same as everything else in IT. That typically it's boards are looking for to have us do more with less. They're trying to cut costs and so on. I think that the idea of reducing costs at this point, at least from a security standpoint, is not a smart move. I think that until you can ensure that you have a substantial configuration of security to protect yourself, it's going to be costing organizations more money. I think that, and this isn't what we refer to as a one and done. That you don't do this one time and then leave it because it's done. These attackers are always ahead of the game. They're always one step ahead, and so we're constantly playing catch up. And it's really a matter of making sure that we have the resources and the funds to be able to continue to protect ourselves. It's with remote workforces being much more prevalent now, and a lot of companies I'm hearing are saying that they're not even considering bringing staff back to the office until at least halfway through, if not the end of 2021. You're now at the mercy of people's private security setups on their own home networks and so on. That these are all potential risks to the organization that were never really a major risk previously. And I think that the idea of spending less on cybersecurity and security in general in 2021 is going to be a mistake.
Okay. Like to turn it to Carlos on this question. What's your take on this?
Thank you. No, I definitely agree on what was just said. I think that right now we are facing a completely transformed business operational landscape that is taking many organizations to have the majority of their people working from home. And that in itself, as John was explaining, is bringing like a different landscape from the risk management perspective. So I think it would be a mistake to reduce the level of investment you need to make on cybersecurity. Now, in addition to that, something that we are seeing that is happening all around the world is the evolution of privacy regulations. So the interest that people is having on having their personal information protected and the interest that regulators are putting on that is significant. We just saw a couple of years ago how Europe was leading the transformation with the enforcement of the General Data Protection Regulation, known as the GDPR, that is setting the new gold standard when it comes to personal information protection. Last year, the Prime Minister in Canada, by the end of 2019, was instructing the cabinet on the need of reinforcing privacy regulations in the country. And something that I think is pretty exciting is that just today, the Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry has presented to the House of Commons in Canada a bill that is promoting or entitling the enacting of the Consumer Privacy Protection Act the Personal Information and Data Protection Tribunal Act, and of course, the amendment of any necessary regulation that has to be transformed or that has to be evolving in order to respond to what the market is needing in the entire world. That means, from my understanding, that PIPEDA or PIPEDA is going to be evolving, and it is going to be potentially giving us what we have been requesting from a long time ago. And what I think is going to be happening with Canadian regulation is that we are going to be following the European path on that, meaning that we are going to be having something perhaps similar to what we have on the GDPR.
I think that's a really good caveat, especially about how regulations are going to be impacting organizations in terms of resources and strength. So really
Yeah.
pointed out. So I just want to add another spin to this question before I turn this question to Olivera. I was just this morning, EC Council published a blog which said that by 2023, the annual spend on cybersecurity is going to surpass $151 billion annually. Olivera, you work for an organization which is a fast-growing telecom organization, and you guys have a significant stake in 5G too. So, from your perspective and from your experience, how do you see the cybersecurity budgets? Do you see them growing? Do you see them shrinking in the future?
So what I'm going to say, I'm going to start first by making a comment that this 70% budget going down from the perspective of enterprises. So actually, I do believe that budget is going to go down. And this is just a reflection of businesses going down and businesses making less money. So I think it's important always to remind ourselves, we are in a business of supporting business. Like, we have to put security controls to make safer products and stuff like that. So if enterprises are not making money, there is not going to be a money to be spent on cybersecurity. Simply, they're making less. So cybersecurity budget in the enterprise is usually a percentage of IT budget. So if revenue and profit is going down, definitely IT budget and security budget is going to go down. So I also want to make a comment that I think now is a time to think about how do we do more with less and how do we automate some of the tasks that we have to do, especially in a SOC. So maybe it's a time to turn out and talk to your vendors and see, your security vendors, and see if there is anything that they can help you using a big data, machine learning, artificial intelligence, so to automate some of these manual tasks and activities that two people are doing in the SOC or other security operations. So when it comes to Huawei, now to answer your question that you started, so cybersecurity is a top priority for Huawei. So it's to be or not to be, it's in our DNA. We absolutely cannot afford to cut cybersecurity budgets. For us, it's still top priority.
Yes. Okay, so add another spin to this discussion. Let's talk about compliance, regulatory compliance, and I think Carlos just touched upon that briefly. But I'd like to turn it to Mike Melo, who works for an industry which is a highly regulated industry, let's just say. So, Mike, do you think that that the recent changes to the compliance mandates would have any impact on board of directors, BoD priorities, given the fact that PHIPAA underwent some changes back in March? There's going to be some changes upcoming on the provincial privacy regulations. And I think Carlos also alluded to some other changes which you might see in the future. But how do you see this impacting your sector, which is the healthcare sector?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think we, as security professionals, have been expecting some larger changes coming down the pipeline from a regulatory compliance perspective, especially with the dawn of the Privacy Acts in California and GDPR in the EU. We've even recently had some changes to PIPEDA in 2018. But I think that there's definitely going to be an impact on where the board focuses priorities, and this is where Scott actually referenced this around educating the board, right? We have to keep them apprised of what's going on in this landscape to help them with their decision making and helping these elements of change work their way into their prioritization for their direction in the company. I actually said it earlier. I think that we've seen some great help from our government around having some leniency in our capabilities in providing timely services, right? So in this COVID world, we've had to do these COVID self screenings at facilities, and there's PHIPAA, HIPAA, PIPA, all these different regulatory requirements that they have certain data sovereignty rules about PHI and PI information residing in Canada, but a lot of SaaS applications are still not yet offering Canadian-centric data centers, and this has always been a challenge, especially in the healthcare industry, is finding appropriate applications or technologies that we can leverage. Sometimes that technology is there, but based on our regulatory requirements, we're restricted in certain areas. So there's been a lot of support and help there. I think that this is just a growing element to how organizations are going to have to combat this big change that's happened and this big churn. And I think we're not out of the woods yet. We're not done seeing what this change is going to be. I think more organizations are going to continue to be remote operations, and naturally the regulations are going to have to evolve with that. So I definitely think there's going to be some significant impacts in what's coming down the pipeline, and it's our jobs as security leaders to ensure that our boards, and we're working with hand in hand with our privacy teams, to ensure that the board is aware of what's coming down.
Sorry, I wasn't mute. Okay, thank you, Mike. I'd like to turn it to John. John, I know you are working in a sector which is also impacted by various regulations and perhaps might be impacted by the recent changes in PIPEDA, which happened 2 years ago. But how do you see recent changes in regulatory compliance impacting your board of directors?
Well, I think as more and more personal and corporate private data gets tracked, that there is a higher requirement to ensure that we have security measures in place to protect that data. And I think that from a board of directors standpoint, I think that it's I think Scott was the one that had talked before about educating the board. That this has really moved from, the board simply sitting at the table approving budgets for security and other initiatives, to actually having an understanding. They don't need to be experts, but they need to have an understanding of cybersecurity and the impacts that it can have on business. And so that when they come to the table to discuss it, to approve budgets or to discuss plans for coming years, that they need to understand what impact cybersecurity has on that, because this isn't an also ran, this isn't an oh by the way. Cybersecurity has to be baked into everything that all of the plans that we make. It's the more we move to a SaaS model, it opens up more security risks. And, so it's everything we do now going forward requires us to always make sure that we also ask, how does this affect us from a cybersecurity standpoint? And I think the board needs to be involved in that discussion.
No, yeah.
May I say something?
Sure, Carlos, go ahead.
Just in addition to what Mike and John said, I think that something I like from Mike's comments is that he was talking about this integration that is needed between the cybersecurity practitioner and the privacy practitioner. And John is taking even further that comment by saying cybersecurity needs to be baked in basically everything we do within the organization, which I think is great. The challenge we have seen, and this is coming from a study that the firm EY does every single year, the Global Information Security Survey, is the level of effectiveness that cybersecurity practitioners are having in the relationships they have with other executives within the organization. So we have found that the relationship with the information technology leader seems to be very solid, which is not surprising because the majority of the cybersecurity functions have their genesis within the IT department. What is concerning from this report is that the level of effectiveness with other executives within the organization are not as solid as the relationship that the CISO has with IT. So I think that going back to educating the board and interacting with the board and teaming with the rest of the organization, it seems that something that we need to pay attention to as well is on how the cybersecurity leader is going to be managing his or her relationships with the rest of the organization to make them very, very solid and to be there for the others and have the others working for him or her as well.
That's a very good point. Thank you. I think at the end of the day, it's about more visibility at the board level, more education and awareness at the board level, and more ownership. Really good points. Now let's turn the conversation back to healthcare. And I think it's fair to say that ever since the pandemic started, the sector which has taken the biggest hit from every point of view, every possible point of view, is the healthcare sector, be it resources, be it cyber attacks, be it operational fatigue, or whatever you want to call it. So from that perspective, uh, how do you see that the board of directors BOD priorities have changed after this whole thing? So I'd like to turn it to Scott. What's your take on this?
You know, you're exactly right. It has been a huge impact on healthcare broadly for a host of reasons, not least of which obviously is a clinical impact that we felt because of COVID-19. I think from a board perspective, you know, I'd say the priorities are not vastly different than they were before. I think fundamentally the board is focused on risk management and risk mitigation, and I think COVID introduced a series of new risks that weren't necessarily you know, top of mind previously, but that now need to be looked at very seriously. I think the broader industry impact, the broader healthcare impact certainly has highlighted a set of these new risks to the board, whether those be our clinical operations risks. But I think, you know, bringing into thinking about telemedicine as being a new way of delivering care, I think from a board perspective, that brings forward a set of risks that sort of were previously not a huge part of what we did. But that's been a massive transformation in terms of the way we operate. And thinking about, you know, not obviously focus so much on remote work, which definitely has impacted us, but thinking about how do we then deliver clinical care from a remote perspective is definitely something that's been highlighted from the board down through the leadership. So I think that's probably the largest impact that we've seen is you know, the care delivery model and the risk management and risk mitigation associated with COVID. Obviously changing the way we manage our patients and changing the way we manage visitors to the hospital. All of these are sort of strategic and tactical decisions that we've had to make in order to mitigate some of the risk both to our staff and to our patients. And telemedicine has been a huge transition for us. I think one of the physicians I work with made a comment that we made more progress in 2 months than we had in the previous 10 years. And when you start thinking about what that means for care delivery, that is nothing but a positive from a clinical perspective, but in and of itself introduces a whole series of risks that we as security professionals need to begin to consider much more than we have before. And I think the board is really on top of understanding what these implications are and making sure that they're working with our stakeholders, with our leadership, with our operational folks to ensure that we're able to make these transitions as seamless and smoothly as possible, but also ensuring at the end of the day, from a hospital perspective, that the focus remains on our patients. I think that's what we all have in the back of our mind, you know, even from a security perspective. Our focus is on ensuring the safety of our patients. And in many ways, we can draw direct parallels between the security operations and patient safety. And I think that's a really important thing that our board is looking for is how do we ensure that in everything we do, we're putting the patient first? And COVID has certainly had an impact on how we do that, but the focus on the patient has not changed.
Good point. I'd like to add another spin to this question. Mike, you work for an organization which, even though you guys are in the healthcare sector, you guys cannot do telemedicine because you are in the business of diagnostics. And I think in your case, your organization, right before the onset of the pandemic, you guys were recovering from a recent security breach also. So how has that impacted your BoD priorities? I mean, in terms of keeping the lights on and cybersecurity and pandemic, how has your journey been so far?
Yeah, and first, I'd just like to take a moment, just really quickly here. this is, big shout out and a thank you to all frontline workers in healthcare everywhere, and also the back end workers that are helping support these companies, get through this challenging time. It's definitely been a journey, I would say, for most. Us, obviously we had our security breach in the end of last year, and then right into COVID. So cybersecurity has been a high priority objective for the board for some time, and with the security incident that we had, and also with COVID, so we're being extremely vigilant across the board there. But it's pretty scary out there right now in the healthcare industry. Every day we're almost seeing a new organization getting hit with ransomware, with some type of attack. It's it's real. The threat is real, and these attackers know it. I think I saw in the Verizon report we're the #1 attacked industry now. It's definitely, these are real stakes out there, right? And we've seen some impacts on how ransomware can affect healthcare, hospital systems going down. This is critical infrastructure. So, I think the board of directors, they really understand that these are real risks to our organization, but most importantly, our customers. If we can't operate, we can't serve our customers. And although we're not in the business of necessarily telemedicine, there has been a extreme acceleration in digitizing how we do business. When we start looking at, our patient service centers where our customers come and have their, specimens collected, we would have physical paper requisition forms to do so. So we're looking at ways on how to implement electronic exchange with physicians to make a, paperless route. Obviously has ancillary benefits to the environment as well, going paperless. But as Scott said, we're making tremendous strides. I think the healthcare industry as a whole has just revolutionized how a community of people can come together and organizations can come together to deliver for their customers, for our patients, which is ultimately the most critical thing there. So I think the board of directors, they understand these priorities. They require us to ensure that they are well informed in these uncertain times, and they are uncertain times, right? We don't know what tomorrow is going to look like. Numbers are always increasing. They're fluctuating, and there's a place of limbo. But I think that at least from what I've seen at our organization, there's been a very strong and reinforced message. There's vigilance and just a really good management strategy from our board of directors, our executive leadership team. There's tremendous support for our frontline workers, and I think that this is just going to be the new normal for the foreseeable future, right? These cyber attacks are not going to go anywhere, right? If anything, they're just going to be amplified. So that's why it's so important that we remain vigilant in protecting our organizations and our customers.
Thank you, Mike. And just want to share something with regards to the healthcare sector. So, and I think all the healthcare security leaders already know about it. On the 30th of October, Department of Homeland Security, the FBI, CSIS, and CSE issued a memo or an advisory to all the healthcare institutions that they are at an increased risk of particular ransomware attacks. I won't go into the details, but one of the co-writers of that was on a phone call with me on the 30th of October, and they told me something which really touched me. And they said that as an incident response company or a cyber forensics organization, they get requests every day for our organization. But whenever they get a request for one of the hospitals or healthcare sector, that particular client becomes high priority for them. It's not about money anymore. It's about supporting the healthcare organizations who are right now working towards saving human lives. And this goes without saying. And I think I really want to acknowledge the role that cybersecurity professionals, incident response professionals, and forensics folks are playing in making sure that healthcare institutions can respond to such threats and recover from such threats. So just wanted to acknowledge the role that you guys are playing, because I mean, this is a lot. I mean, I heard about a hospital in Germany where a patient in ER actually expired when that hospital got hit by a ransomware. So shout out to all of you who play a really important role in making sure that they keep the lights on for healthcare institutions. So yeah, thank you for bringing that up. Okay, anyways, taking this conversation further now that it's more about reporting at the board level. So at various organizations, uh, the CISOs or the CIOs, they have a practice of doing a reporting for the board. Some of them use those really catchy dashboards. Some of them use PowerPoint slide decks and a bunch of things. But uh, how do you think that the reporting structure on cybersecurity to the BoD has changed in the past 8 to 10 months? And the second part of this question is that have you tied in business continuity along with it, or found any other creative ways of highlighting the importance of cybersecurity to the board? So I'd like to turn it to Olivera right now. Olivera, how do you see this whole thing changing?
So yeah, definitely business continuity plan has a pandemic section. So we all had to work and have these pandemic plans in place before this pandemic even hit us. But I think right now, in the light of going through that, we have to go back and update some of the sections of the pandemic plan to make sure we are more prepared. So we definitely didn't expect that it's going to be like this, that almost everybody who is not in manufacturing is going to go home. So I think it's becoming very clear that these pandemic and business continuity plans needs to be updated to reflect this change and to reflect also all the changes that we have to make in a cybersecurity framework and governance to support this. So definitely we revisited them, and I think organizations out there are going to be doing the same, making sure first that pandemic is part of BCP, and then underneath that they do have a section on cybersecurity and privacy in some cases if there is a need for that.
Thank you. Couldn't agree more. Yeah, really good points. John, I'd like to turn it over to you and get your perspective on this.
Yeah, so I would agree with Olivera that I think that I mean, business continuity is all about what do you do in the event of something occurring, and a pandemic where all of a sudden everybody is working remotely, or that you've had to shut things down, is absolutely something that needs to be incorporated into your business continuity plan. I think as far as reporting to the board, I'd mentioned earlier that my presentations to the board have changed since COVID, where a discussion about what we're doing to ensure that we have ample security in place with all of our staff working remotely has become a common occurrence. That's part of every presentation that I do to the board, and I think that I think it will continue even beyond the pandemic. I think that it has raised a new awareness. As we've talked throughout this session, that cybersecurity is something that really needs to get baked into, I'll say, all that we do, with additional government regulations coming out, with the risks and the issues that have arisen more with more and more actors attacking organizations like healthcare. It's definitely something that needs to get to raise the awareness. And it's, we talked before in preparation for this session, we talked about risk appetite and risk tolerance, and it really depends on where those levels are. You may have some organizations that say, you know what, it's not that big an issue for us. If we happen to get hacked, we can survive for a week or 2 weeks without. You have other organizations, as you discussed the incident at the hospital in Germany, that a patient died because of a ransomware attack that was occurring at that moment. And so there's going to be a variety of levels, but every business continuity plan is going to have to consider a pandemic plan in there if it's not already there. And I think that the boards need to be more aware. We talked earlier about educating the boards, that the boards need to understand more, not just to be able to say the word, they need to actually understand what it means and what the implications are on the business. That it's not just about the bottom line. It's about how do you prevent cybersecurity attacks, because that can ultimately affect your bottom line.
Rightly said. I think the boards need to be more aware of or more cognizant of the ever-evolving cybersecurity threat landscape, which is going to evolve even more. I mean, we're not even sure about the next cybersecurity threat or the next epidemic or pandemic which might impact operations. So rightly said.
No, absolutely. And just for the record, we've heard people talking about the new normal. I tend to refer to this as the new abnormal, because it's going to be a completely different landscape for some time to come.
Yeah, I mean, we're right in the middle of the second wave right now, and let's see how that goes. Anyways, I'd like to turn it over to Carlos. Carlos, from your perspective or from your lens, how have you seen the BoD reporting changing in terms of cybersecurity?
As I said before, I think that there's more interest now in understanding how to tackle these multiple challenges. And just echoing what Olivera and John were saying, I think that in order to reinforce that, something that is key is practice. And when I say practice, what I mean is that it is pretty useful to define risk scenarios, including the type of challenge we are dealing with right now, this pandemic one, in order to find out how we are going to be reacting to those situations, how we are going to be having everyone within the organization orchestrating the different actions they have to execute in order to properly respond to that. So the execution of tabletop exercise or drills that are going to be putting the entire team in front of a situation that might be representing a consequence like the one that you were just describing on this hospital in Germany is what we have to do. Because it is not only defining policies and defining procedures, is, as John has said it more than once, and I love how he presents that, is baking cybersecurity into everything the company is doing, is transforming the culture. And in order to transform the culture, it is not only writing policies and procedures, it's just practicing that and doing it once and twice and 3 times and more in order to become expert on what you have to do. Of course, there's different levels of responsibilities, but I think this is something that is key. And I see the willingness and I see the interest in the board on doing things like this. I have been working in a couple of engagements very, very recently where we have seen the board very, very engaged on deciding what they have to do in order to reinforce the cybersecurity posture the company has. So I think it is moving things from policies and procedures and things that can be, I will say, static to something more dynamic, to make of this something that will be embedded into everyone's head so that everyone can think of cybersecurity, data protection, privacy, and all of these concepts when a new process or a new technology is going to be released to the production environment.
Rightly said. And I mean, every time you bring up the topic of baking in security, the first thing which comes to my mind is privacy by design and security by design.
Yeah, of course. And you know what? Even taking that a little bit further, the concept of privacy by design was coined by Dr. Ankabukian, is very Canadian. But I think we need to take it even further. It is not only privacy by design. Maybe we need to think of it as security by design, or maybe internal control by design, or maybe we need to think of what we want to create in our stakeholders' minds, and that might be trust. So maybe we need to be thinking of trust by design. So what is it that we need to do in order to embed in every single process and in every single action that we execute within our organization, those elements that will help us increase the trust that the stakeholders have in our company. So that's something that we need to realize in order to transform the organization. Yeah.
Like you said. Yeah. Let's just say that we need to have a more practical and a more proactive approach towards controls.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyways, we are almost at the tail end of our conversation, and I'd like to talk more about the role of technology and security leadership. And I'd like to turn it over to Olivera. So, I mean, in terms of technology and security leadership, how do you see the security technology leadership helping the board in providing guidance and oversight as the COVID-19 threat expands? So,
Thank you. So the security landscape is changing and these attacks are being more sophisticated. And actually, one of the reasons is that now artificial intelligence and machine learning algorithms are being used actually for the attacks. So they're not only used as a defense in the SOCs, they're using an attack. So definitely becoming much more sophisticated. So I think the role of the IT and the security guys is to actually do their due diligence and research and see are there any tools or products out there that can help us automate or prevent these attacks. And I think what I would like to do here, I would like to introduce a concept of not cybersecurity, but cyber resiliency. So I think it's a time for IT professionals and cybersecurity professionals to start educating people on what cyber resilience is. So it's actually basically a concept that we are going to be attacked for sure. So in order to prevent attacks from having a bigger impact, it's very important from the very beginning to design our network and our applications with that in mind. How do we design our network to be more cyber resilient? There are tools, there are techniques, there is a methodology for that. So I think our role is going to be to start thinking from that perspective, not how do we protect from the attack, but once we are under attack, what do we need to do to minimize the impact? So in wrapping up, I would like people just to go from this discussion with a cyber resilience in their mind. So this is a new buzzword that we all have to think about.
Thank you, Olivera. I'd like to turn it over to Mike. Mike, how do you see the technology and security leadership helping the board of Pakistan responding to the ever-evolving COVID-19 threat?
Yeah, I think that so it really comes down to what we're sharing with the board of directors, right? Some of the elements that I like to share is what are our top risks that we got going on right now in the company? What's the emerging risks as well? And giving some more background or information. So, specific to COVID, I think most organizations probably have this new risk is more so than ever is the malicious insider, right? This insider threat. So, there's a lot of stress going on in the world today right now. This is not just a public healthcare crisis. This is a financial and economic crisis. So, with the stress of all of the agility required, all of the work and the accelerated fashion, there's potential compensation reductions, there's delayed promotions. So, you have this higher probability of disgruntled employees turning potentially maliciously active. You also have cyber espionage, industry espionage happening as well, more pervasive now than ever. Especially with this race for a vaccine. So I think that it's really comes down to, ensuring that we're adequately supporting the board with the information we're giving them. So, continuing to talk about your risks, even tactical risks, new emerging threat and risks that are coming into the organization that you're seeing, and how you're ultimately putting your remediation or compensating control plans in effect, and even asking the board, if there might be support that you need from them in some of these challenges, especially some of those larger risks that are full encompassing of the entire organization. I'm also doing a segment where we talk about learning from breaches in the news. So there's a lot of breaches going on, and I think it's important because this is really where executives and board of directors get information about what's going on in the world from a security perspective on a more day-to-day basis than necessarily talking to us maybe once a quarter or so forth, right? So giving some context and perspective as to, what happened in a breach, how, where our organization sits from protective and standpoints and how we would have been able to remediate this or address this and, speaking specifically to cyber resiliency, right? How would we protect, how would we identify, detect, and respond to ensure we have business continuity to some of these attacks that are pervasive throughout the industry. So I think really it comes down to just, maybe there's a change to how we're presenting to the board, ensuring that, we're not doing the same old presentations, maybe modifying and ensuring that we're just getting the right messaging across as these threats are constantly evolving almost on a day-to-day basis.
Thank you, Mike. I think you made some really good points about creating board level awareness about the current threat landscape and creating more awareness about the recent threats. So we have 4 minutes left in the conversation. So I'll pick on one of the questions which has just come up in the chat window, and I'll probably turn that question to Scott. So the question is, how important is it for BoD to include members with cybersecurity experience? So I'll start off with Scott, and anybody else can chime in too.
Yeah, thanks, Farooq. I think it's extremely important for the board of directors to have sufficient experience that they can understand the risks that are being explored as part of board reporting. Having people that have deep cybersecurity experience, I think, is not something that's going to be common across boards. But I do think that it's important for us as security leaders and for everybody to ensure that the board is in a position that the risks are well understood. I think far too often we don't take enough time to explore the risks, explore the impact, and make sure that everybody truly understands it. Because at the end of the day, the board is in a position where they're establishing the risk tolerance for the organization, and they're in a position where they, in some cases, are accepting certain types of risks. But I think if they don't have sufficient knowledge and experience with cybersecurity to truly understand what's being discussed from a risk perspective, then very often they may end up accepting those risks that they really shouldn't, because they don't understand the full impact and the breadth of the risk. So I think there's some degree of experience that is necessary. Speaking of my board, we have quite a few people that have a lot of experience in regulated industries, whether it be banking or otherwise. And so they bring a degree of understanding based on the roles that they have within their organizations. None of them are CISOs or otherwise cybersecurity experts, but they've definitely taken the time to become knowledgeable enough that they can speak about the nature of the risks, and they can understand the conversation that's being brought to them from an update perspective. And in doing that, they can ensure that from a governance perspective, they're establishing the right kind of mentality from an organizational perspective, and they're establishing the right kind of tolerance from an organizational perspective, because they do have enough experience that they can appropriately manage those risks on behalf of the organization.
No, rightly said. John, I'll let you chime in.
Yeah, I would agree completely with Scott, and I'll expand on that our board has a retired CISO as one of the board members. And I can tell you from a CIO standpoint, it is very comforting, because invariably trying to explain some of these issues and risks and so forth to the board are quite difficult to do. And by having a board member that's on my side because he fully understands all of this, certainly makes it a lot easier to explain. And quite frankly, he also challenges me because he understands the questions to be asking of me as well.
Thank you, John. Okay, so there's a question about board level training. So I'll take that towards the end. I see another question coming up, and it's what's the role of BoD in offensive cybersecurity practices? Do they have any oversight or voting rights on certain decisions that are made? I know this is something tactical in nature, so I'll just open the floor for anybody to respond to it. Does the board have any role on it? I mean, I have an opinion about it, but I won't share it. But can anybody just chime in shortly?
I can make a comment to it. So I think it depends on the nature of it, right? If you're taking more of an proactive OSINT engagement, right, and you're even involving OSINT on your board of directors, absolutely. I think there's they have some sort of oversight to that, but for the most part, I haven't seen that as necessarily being something that they're in the weeds on the decision making for that.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that, because I believe this is something completely tactical. So unless this is something which has an influence on the strategic direction, I don't think they would chime in. So yeah, thank you, Mike. One last thing before we end today's session. We are almost at the end of today's call. So there was a question about what kind of courses should board of directors consider taking. Some of the courses that I can recommend is, first of all, EC Council has a certification called CISO. ISACA has a certification called CGUIDE, CISM, which is a really good course. COBIT has got some really good direction from the board's perspective. So be it EC Council, be it ISACA, they have got some really good courses. I'm not sure if SANS has something on leadership, but they have, both of these certification bodies have some really good certifications and courses which could be taken. With that, I think we shall conclude today's session. Thank you all for sharing your insights on such an important topic, which touches on really important aspects of security strategy and the responsibility of the board. I have lots to take away today, but thank you all for sharing your perspective. Have a great day.
Thank you so much.
Thanks very much.
Yeah,
Take care.
thank you.
Thanks for having us. Take care.
Bye.
Stay safe.